Hello and welcome to the AfterParty, Conversations with SpyParty players. Today I'm talking to Bill Towen.
Hello, this is me.
Hello. Is that how you pronounce it? Is it just one word, Bill Towen?
It's built to win.
Bill
Built to win.
Bill to win.
I'm not sure how. Don't ask
Oh,
too many
Bill to
questions.
win. I thought that was like a name. I was like, oh, he's
Yeah.
Bill and his surname is Towen. Bill to win. Okay, awesome.
That's an actually a very it's kind of funny you brought that up. This is gonna look like it's set up. I actually have a I wrote Build to Win on my graduating high school ring. You buy those rings and then they say your name or whatever. But I didn't put my name. I put that, which is my username. But they actually separated it as if it was my last name, which it is not. So
Awesome.
it's pretty bad.
It's your alter ego now. Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
Well, we haven't done this for a while, but you suggested this. So the After Party is a podcast about this video game called Spy Party. And what I used to do was get people to describe what Spy Party is. And so since you suggested that as an idea, let's do that. So, Build to Win, what is Spy Party?
Essentially, I'm going to be going from a different angle. So people usually kind of go very concretely about what Spy Party is. It's a spy at a party. I'm going to go for another angle. So it's basically about rebellion against Big Brother, The spy is fighting against some kind of, overarching element that's looking at what everybody's doing. I think that's a very bad explanation.
No, no, it's well, the spy often
But
feels like the
it's
underdog, so it kind of does
mhm,
analogize well to Big Brother.
mhm. And on another hand, it's also kind of like conformity, where you're trying to conform to whatever other people are doing, but you also want to kind of be yourself, right? And
Hmm.
you don't want people to see, you don't want the sniper to see, but as a spy, you kind of want to do these things, but people don't want you to do these things because if you do these things, you get punished, you lose the game. I think
Hmm.
it kind of it leaves an interesting kind of venue for kind of exploration. I think video games are more than just a way to pass the time. They're more interesting than that. There's a lot going on within them, and I think Spy Party is more than just a spy at a party. Let's just I guess leave it at that.
Yeah, cool.
More.
But yeah, it's like what you're describing is kind of like the game's about understanding what the other person is expecting. Like that's something
Hmm.
you learn when playing people of different skill levels is, oh, they have different ideas of what they expect and what they find suspicious, and that's actually the thing that's important to pay attention to, and not concrete details of, oh, you're supposed to do this or else you'll look fishy. It's okay, what does this person see and what did they find fishy?
That actually ties into something I guess we might talk about later. In that Spy Party is really a game about people. You very much learn that the person you're playing against is an actual human being. You have
Hmm.
to kind of adapt your strategy to whatever they're doing. And this, to some extent, is I guess applicable to every single game ever created. But I think more so in Spy Party than perhaps other games that we might get into later, like whatever Counter Strike, League of Legends, other popular multiplayer competitive games.
Yeah, cool. So, the impetus for the two of us talking was you made this really interesting post, I guess because you're studying social psychology or having an interest in the subject,
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
this idea called the contact hypothesis, and sort of your thoughts on why this is an important idea to try and apply to Spy Party, especially on the brink of it going on Steam and potentially getting lots of new people into the game. So, do you want to describe for us what the contact hypothesis is?
All right, sure. I can go through that very briefly. The contact hypothesis is essentially a set of criteria which was put together by a Mr. Alport in a very long time ago, I guess, in 1954, to essentially aid in improving relations among groups of people that are experiencing conflict, or essentially just groups of people. In order to reduce the amount of conflict that they experience, you can set in place a certain amount of kind of, I guess, kind of. Okay, let me reset that. The contact hypothesis is a set of criteria to improve in relations among groups, I'll list these criteria very briefly. It's equal status, which means that the contact between these groups should occur in circumstances that give the groups equal status. There's the personal interaction criteria, which is that the contact should involve one-to-one interactions among the members of the groups that are involved in this contact. There should be also cooperative activities. So members of the groups should join together in an effort to achieve cooperative goals. Also, there's the social norms criteria, which is that social norms should be defined by relevant authorities.
And the authorities exist outside of the two groups in the contact.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And those should favor contact, I guess, between the groups, should favor good relations between the groups.
So
yeah, I realize now it's
yeah, sorry, you go. Okay, I'll go first, then you go. So the thing I actually didn't quite get until rereading this was that it isn't just about the idea of in a community individuals interacting. It's about the idea of different groups interacting, and the problem, I guess, of social cliches forming and trying to avoid segregation between one group of people and another based on their different experiences.
Exactly. Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head, because this theory was originally put in place or thought about in the 1950s, kind of in an era of segregation between black and whites. And that's kind of the impetus for this whole thing coming together, is thinking about why that went wrong, why it went well, and kind of that's where it comes from. So segregation is actually a pretty good word to use in this scenario.
Interesting. Yeah, so why do you think we, as the current SpyParty community, or really, I guess, the current SpyParty forum community, because there's even a kind of non-intentional segregation of there are players who don't use the forum, and so there's a separation between those people and the people who play and do use the forum. But anyway, why do you think it's important for us as the SpyParty community to take interest? What is at risk?
Okay, so essentially, I think social psychology in general shows that the social context around people has a very strong effect on a person's behavior or on a group of people's behavior. And something that people underestimate a lot is how strong this effect is. So one of the concepts in social psychology is the fundamental attribution error, which essentially says that people are heavily biased towards explaining other people's behavior by their personality rather than the situation or the context. So if I can give you an example, let's say I tell you that a man killed another man. Let's say we'll call the first guy John. So John killed somebody. What's your first thought in regards to John?
I guess my first thought would be what he did was wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, so
it's tough. I'm putting you on the spot here, but essentially, the first thing that comes to a person's mind, we have a heavy bias, is thinking about the person, who he is, why he did that. Well, not why he did that, but his personality, right? We think, is he a bad person? Is he a murderer? We don't necessarily think as much. It takes longer to think about the situation, right? We could ask questions like, was he conscripted into the army? Is he a police officer? Was it an accident? And essentially, there's a lot of research showing that this is a very true fact, that we think about personality rather than situation. So let's say we can look at a community like the SpyParty community and think, oh, it's a good community because the people are good. But in reality, I believe that it's much more so that the situation or the context surrounding it is actually creating a good community. And we might underestimate that because of this error that we make.
Right. It's something we take for granted.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. So what are some of the ideas in the contact hypothesis that you think can be applied to SpyParty directly to try and make this a more deliberate thing that we're aware of in how in how we talk to new players and treat them?
Well, I have a couple ideas. They're not necessarily ideas. Essentially, what I'm doing is in that post that we talked about. Essentially, I take these 4 criteria that I listed previously and link them to how it currently works in SpyParty, and perhaps how we can kind of extend that relationship even further. So A couple of the ideas were, for example, like equal status. This one, I talk a little bit about how, let's say equal status is everybody has the same rights. So in a community, let's say one thing that's a bit iffy, I think, is maybe showing the number of people posts and the number of posts a person makes on the forums, let's say, can, I think, have an effect perhaps on their status in the community. And thus, in relationship to that, in order to ensure that we have a more equal status, that the equal status criteria is more satisfied, that we can actually eliminate that and not show the number of posts somebody makes. That's kind of one of the examples I suggested, but it's not. There's a lot more, I guess, but I think the most important part is kind of understanding the concept of how the contact hypothesis is currently being applied to SpyParty, how it currently affects it, and how we can kind of extend that.
Right. Well, the example you bring up of number of posts, I think like a practical idea might be something like thinking about how do you respond to different people's input. So like how you respond to one person's suggestion versus another, because that can be an important thing of like if someone doesn't often post in the forums and they're nervous about voicing their opinion, the way they see other people being treated for what they say will have an influence on how likely they are to say something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that's one aspect of it that this would help kind of deal with. I guess when I say equal status, I say rights, but I also mean, treating people in different ways depending on who they are and what they've done, I guess.
Right.
I guess to a certain extent that's okay, but we should try to minimize the effect of not trying to. I'm not really sure how to explain that.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Tricky thing. I'm like I said, I guess I'm not an expert, but I do have an interest in social psychology. And although technically I have to admit that my expertise is software engineering, it's something that I'm interested by. I'm not sure why I'm saying this right now. I think I should stop and take another sip of water.
Well, no, I find it's good to know people's context of like what their interests are and how those things relate to various things they're interested in. I mean, software engineering is a very good example of where a lot of these sort of problems are happening, and that there's a lot of social cliches and sort of closed communities and problems in people like not even being directly kept out by like by like overbearing rules, but just ways that people speak to each other that do not help.
Yeah, it's especially, I think, well, what's happening in the future is going to be great because I think the world is changing for the better in general, not just in software engineering or any particular domain. I think everything is kind of getting better in certain respects, especially in terms of diversity and let's say equal status in the bigger kind of world. Because if you think about it, the contact hypothesis kind of applies to everything right now because everybody is kind of different and coming together, and because of things like the internet and globalization, this is happening, but like on a very, very big scale too.
Well, it's particularly interesting. So the example we're looking at is an online video game. Something interesting in SpyParty is there's a lot less. Perhaps it's just because of the small pool of players, but it feels like there's less animosity than in other online games. In other online games, because the game itself, so let's say Counter-Strike, it's a fairly intimate game, but there's still a lot of sort of distance between you. Like you're not required to speak to the other people. Your interactions with them are from a distance. Often you'll sort of be randomly partnered with people, and so there's not that much close connection with each other. Whereas in SpyParty, you're sort of incentivized or forced to talk to another person directly, and so this stuff seems more relevant to that, or the way we talk to each other is more important in this context.
So yeah, essentially one of the things that I talk about in the my post about the contact hypothesis is how it applies to SpyParty more so than other games, and that's why I guess the community works, right? Because the contact hypothesis is, a set of criteria that make it such that relations between people are better. I think that for various reasons, well, one of them being personal interaction between the players playing the game,
Right.
the community is better for that.
Hmm.
That's specifically the personal interaction criteria of the contact hypothesis, basically of having one-on-one interactions between the people of the groups, right?
Yeah, totally. Um, w One of the other points of this contact hypothesis you were bringing up is the idea of cooperative activities. This is interesting since Spy Party is a competitive game, um, but this discussion of cooperation brings up this interesting question of is cooperation um, uh, and competition, are these things actually different, or do they actually share some like common ground? um, I think is an interesting discussion to have. Do you think competition is unrelated to cooperation? Because I think they do share traits.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends in the context. Let's say in the context of a game, I do think that two players are in fact performing a cooperative activity in that they are playing a game together, and you need cooperation between the two players to actually kind of get that done. Whereas in a situation like, let's say, a war, you kind of don't really have that cooperation. Where if one side decides not to play, well, then they're kind of out of the game, so to speak, I guess.
Well, even there's kind of like common agreed, like I mean perhaps more in sort
Hmm,
of older wars where you'd have like a period where it was agreed that there would be a ceasefire so that both
hmm.
sides could retrieve their dead. That's like weirdly a cooperative activity in the middle of the most antagonistic situation you can imagine, which is war.
Hmm. Perhaps, yeah. I wouldn't say go as far to say that in every single conflict there's always cooperation somewhere hidden there, but I'd say that is often the case. You often find some kind of cooperation between people where there is conflict, and I think that's just a human nature, really. I mean, we were built, let's say, to cooperate because that has increased our rate of, let's say, survival.
Hmm.
And I think it's built within us to cooperate with others and form cliques. And some of those aspects are good, some of them are bad. But now that we know about them, or at least we know more about how human beings work, we can use that to our advantage.
Hmm. And there are a lot of opportunities for cooperation in Spy Party. There's the sort of immediate ones of when you play with another person, you're both agreeing to play, like someone's accepting an invite, then you're both agreeing on what the game types are because the spy chooses it, and then the sniper either accepts or rejects. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of cooperation there in the setup. Um, but also, like, have you had much mentoring with experienced players?
Not much. I played a little bit with the scientists, but other than that, I don't think I've had much experience with very top level players.
Okay. Because an interesting experience I remember with Drawn Onward, who's a very experienced player. Way back when I was still getting to grips with the game, I played a match where he mentored me and taught me a lot. And there was something interesting he said where I thanked him for all the help he gave, and then he said to me, uh, I'm doing this in part because I want you to get better, so that then the game is more interesting for me. So the act of competition was also this cooperation thing of we're all trying to make each other better so that we can have the experience of the competition, which is
Very
weird, right?
interesting.
It's yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I think that shows that there's something good going on here
Hmm.
in terms of the game. I don't know if a game is able to push somebody to want other players to get better. I think the game is doing something good for that player.
Right, but I think it's because of like competition in this context of a
Hmm.
game. You need an opponent, so you want the opponent to be good. So like the
Have fun,
the
yeah.
yeah, so the competition of the game actually requires cooperation of the players.
Actually, that's a very interesting point because if you think about it, later on when there are a lot of players, or more players than there are now, maybe players would have less of an incentive to teach others how to play because that won't be a problem anymore. You'll always have somebody who's good enough to play you, let's say.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. They're still at this point sort of uh, players who aren't as interested in mentoring. And I think that that's something important for us to discuss in this idea of the contact hypothesis is what if there are some players who just aren't interested in going through the process of teaching new people, like let's say new players who come in from Steam, and are just interested in getting good and don't want to think about other players. Like how do you fit them into the contact hypothesis if they're like not interested in helping other people?
Well, to a certain extent, there's nothing really you can do to force people to act in the way you want. I mean, especially when it's a game, you want people to play a game because they want to, not because you're forcing them to. But
Right.
um, you want to encourage them for sure. You want to encourage them to behave in a way that's going to make your game environment a more pleasant environment for everybody, let's say. Um, I'm not sure. I think maybe if to a very specific way of doing it, of making experienced players want to mentor other players, would be to have some kind of incentive there. But I wouldn't. I'm not in a place where I can say what that incentive would be or how we would implement it,
Hmm.
or even if that is a thing that we want in the future. Because if you think about it, I mean, there are ways of kind of removing people from the process of learning the game. Right now, it's a very bare bones. It's in SpyParty is in, I guess, beta right now,
Yep.
and
Open beta.
I think as we go on, we'll have more kind of tutorials and kind of you'll be able to maybe learn more by yourself. But at this point in the game, I think it's very necessary to have somebody else teach you kind of what to do or how to do it.
Hmm.
Complex game.
Very much so. I had something that was related to that point about learning the game. Yes. So that I think is something important we can take away from what you were saying about this idea of equal status. So even though it's a competitive game and there are like material inequalities in like how much knowledge and experience one person has versus another, perhaps the idea of equal status is something where no matter the no matter the skill of your opponent, you always need to treat them with respect and equality. So maybe equal status should be treated more as something like that, where you're treating someone with equality regardless of whether there is like material equality between the two of you. What do you think of that idea?
I'm not sure.
No?
I,
Yeah, I'm kind
I'm
of fumbling with words for this, but like
Mhm. It's
this
a
was something
difficult
that was
topic
yeah.
because to talk about, especially, I think some things are easier to write about than they are to talk about. But
Yeah, you get
I,
to
I I
think
would
of
have
your
to
words.
here you have to kind of go on the fly and make sure you don't say anything too ridiculous.
Yeah. Um, uh, I'll give it another go. So like
Okay.
Verifo experienced player
Mhm.
was sort of not challenging but questioning this idea of like
Mhm.
okay to have healthy community you need equal status, and he was saying okay, well, what about in like a martial arts class where there is like you know segregation between the person who's teaching and the student, and Spy Party doesn't feel like that situation where the student has to treat, where like the newbie has to like treat the mentor with reverence. Um,
No, I don't think so.
yeah, so
There's not a yeah.
so there's less separation, but I think there still is like slight separation because the new player knows they have less knowledge than the experienced player. So it feels to me like the importance to get to equal status there is the way that the experienced player talks to the new player. I think that's the thought I was getting
Mhm.
at.
Yeah, that's okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I guess in a certain context, the players who are very good at the game perhaps are also kind of acting as sort of authority figures and kind of setting kind of the norm of as being kind of the front line between the new players who are coming in, especially if they're mentoring, if the experienced players are mentoring, they kind of act as kind of this front line of, welcome to the community. They should, I guess, act in a way that kind of shows themselves as an example of what people in the community are and how they should act like.
Hmm. And then hopefully this like behavior then goes down so that then like mid-level players are doing this with new level players. Just in the lobby, I saw someone who had 40 wins playing against someone with 0 wins, and so it was like, oh, cool. So hopefully that person is. I mean, hopefully we don't know like how that match went, but hopefully they're like treating them with the sort of equal status values that were taught to them by whoever they started playing with.
Mhm. And also, I guess another thing maybe to go into is just a clarification of this set of criteria that
Right.
I talked about, the equal status, personal interaction, and all those. It's kind of human beings are very complex. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
And essentially, any kind of attempt to put everything in a box and label it and be very mathematical and scientific about it is kind of difficult. Human beings are complex. You can't predict their behavior perfectly. It's more about probabilities, right? It's about thinking of good rules of thumb of doing things rather than, 100%, this is what we have to do because this is what's going to work,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just keep that in mind. So like, let's say when we say equal status, we just mean this is the general kind of direction we want to go, but it's not we don't necessarily know exactly how to achieve that, or it's an ideal. It's not a thing that's ever going to be achieved of everything is equal and nothing changes. And
Yeah.
I'm not
I I
not sure
guess
if I got that point across.
no. I guess what you're getting at is this idea that the things we want to push towards are things that are sort of general behavior of how we treat each other, and it won't be like solid rules of okay, you have to treat new players this way or else they will respond to you this way.
That's actually well, I guess it's just a very obvious thing of I know I have a little bit of experience in like the airplane, or I guess airplane simulation kind of industry and how they do things. And actually talking about airplanes, and a pilot, when he gets into his chair, he has this big checklist of, is this working? Okay, check, 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 check. He goes through his list. But you can't do that with human beings, right? Human beings are a bit more complex systems that can't really be understood very easily, I guess, especially when you put a lot of them together.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I'm not sure if I'm going in a great place with this, but essentially,
No,
I'm trying
that's
to put a little bit of this is a how something works. Maybe this will help. I don't have all the answers.
well, I think so it's like something I like about SpyParty is that uh, it sort of gets at this idea that you see in a lot of games of thought made visible to itself, and it's
Mhm.
just an interesting process, regardless of sort of where you end up of sort of thinking about your own process of thinking, going, oh, I'm doing this. I didn't realize I was doing that. So regardless of what sort of rules or like ideas we come up with of like how we should talk to people to make sure that we're engaging separate groups in the contact analogy, it's at least good to bring up this discussion so that people are aware of how they're talking to people and so that they're aware of what
Hmm.
their behavior is.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, I agree 100%.
Cool. So do you play much of the game of Spy Party?
At this point, I have about 700 games played, I think.
Okay, cool. Um, have you?
Especially,
Yeah, go on.
I I think I've decided I'm gonna get into the game more. When I initially bought the game, I think it was, I guess, a year and a half ago. I kind of went a bit stir crazy and I played like nonstop for 2 weeks straight.
Whoa.
But because I used to do that a lot, but I don't think it's a healthy way of enjoying a game necessarily.
Was that because you were
Um,
snowed in? You do live in Quebec.
Yes, I do, but I think it was actually summer or winter break. I'm not sure. I can't explain my past behavior. Um,
It just
but
seized you.
I was very much intrigued. Yeah, exactly. It was a very intriguing game, and then something happened, and then I guess work and life, and then I got back into it, I guess, a week ago. Yeah, a week ago, a week and a half ago.
Okay, cool.
And I think I made a commitment now to get back into it, and partly because of how the community seems to be. It's a very, very, very nice community, I guess.
Yeah, it's certainly a draw for a lot of people, myself included, is just, oh, this is a space where people are nice. This is somewhere I would like to spend time.
I think we can agree that it's very different, perhaps, at least in my experience, from what I've seen in other places, in other games, and I think it's a refreshing kind of experience.
Hmm. That that is perhaps something uh, that might also be a reason why uh, people are more polite in in this situation is uh, that the particulars of this game attract a certain sort of person, and maybe that is sort
Hmm.
of coloring uh, why people behave more politely.
Hmm.
Because
Very true.
it's not free. There's a $15 to pay barrier to get in. So someone's not going to be in the Spy Party um, community unless they've had uh, unless they have an interest in this sort of game, and so maybe that
Hmm.
colors the community towards a particular sort of person.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure it does. However, I think when even more players get into it, that's going to be
That'll be
even
different,
less the case
right?
because people who I don't know if the game is going to remain the same price. I think once it starts, if it does get popular eventually, more people are just going to be buying it because people say it's good rather than because they actually have looked into it and
Right.
are interested by the concepts. So that's why I think it's even potentially more important when the to be prepared, I guess, for when these new players come in because the kind of context is going to be different.
Yeah, very true. I feel like there was another. Oh yeah, so the other thought I had about this discussion of the sort of tension between competition and cooperation is that because this is a beta where the game's in the middle of being made and people are giving feedback, um, the sort of goal of making the game itself is a cooperative activity that the community is engaged in. So I think maybe that's something important to consider with the contact hypothesis, that the sort of meta goal of making the game is something that uh, players are cooperating on, and perhaps that's something where inviting people to give their feedback is something that can help join different groups in a contact.
Hmm.
So what do you think of that idea?
I think that's extremely valid. I mean, um, because it's still in development, I guess I'm not exactly sure how Chris, the developer of the game, um, shows this, let's say on the website and all that. But if I'm pretty sure he's doing it in a way such that he's inviting people to, join him and kind of not help him out, but I guess, it's an open beta, and there's this assumption that people who are joining in are going to be doing it and contributing to the development. And I
Hmm.
think that, yes, it does have an effect on the equal status because I guess also people have this thought that maybe their voice matters, especially because the amount of people in the beta is relatively small.
Yeah,
So
and
at
that's
least
that's
on
something that might get skewed with time.
exactly. I know that the reason why I posted, like, I would never have posted my ideas in really a forum. Let's say if the number of people there that were posting on the forum was like extraordinary. There was like, I don't know, 100,000 people playing the game or millions of people. I think I would be less hard pressed to post something like that because I would think, maybe other people are going to do it. Maybe it's so obvious. I don't know. Um,
Hmm.
I,
Well, yeah. Well. Someone gave the feedback a while ago saying they think it's a problem showing how long a forum thread is, because if someone posts something in the suggestions thread and sees that it's 200 pages long, they're going to feel like, well, there's no way that my feedback's going to be heard because there's like this huge laundry
hmm.
list of stuff here that's being overlooked. So they were saying, so what you want to do is like remove that so that it doesn't say how long a forum thread is. And there was a whole debate about that, and I don't think we quite agree. But it is a real problem of like um, when you have a lot more people yelling, it's kind of harder to feel like what you're saying is being heard.
Hmm.
Hmm. Um, there was something I was going to say related to that. So perhaps one way to to get more people engaging in giving feedback, because as I was saying, the subset of people who use the forum of Spy Party players is smaller than the subset of than the superset of Spy Party players. So
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know, like
it's
what what are some ways to like get people into the forum to be giving feedback?
I remember you talking about the subject of how many people, and I think you had said that around 600 people posted more than once on the forums. And so that's pretty incredible considering I think that there are around 15,000 players of the game at this point. Um, I don't know how you would make it such that people are more interested in coming and participating in the forums, other than I guess keeping this environment that it currently has, where everybody is kind of accepted and everybody's thoughts are kind of taken into account to a certain degree, obviously, and the various obvious things like bigger forums button in the game, and I think things that people have already suggested. Um,
Mm. Yep,
but
yep.
it's an interesting. I think that it will be healthy for the community for sure to have more of the people who are actually playing the game to be contributing to it,
Yeah.
to
Well,
its community.
one suggestion that Chris made that was interesting is to maybe make the forums read only to people who aren't in the beta, so that people who don't actually play the game can read what other people are saying.
Hmm. I guess that I might. What would that solve? I guess. Well, I think that's just a good idea in general, but in this context, I'm not sure. I
Well, I
guess. But
I think it might have the subtle impact that then I mean, I don't know how many people would be willing to like pay $50 just to then voice their opinion in a discussion, but it might, grab people's curiosity of like, oh, this is an interesting discussion. I might try this game
Hmm.
now and voice my opinion. I could be wrong,
I
but
think it would.
that might happen.
I think it would increase sales. I'm not an economics specialist, but I think that it would. I think I do enjoy looking at what other people talk about and people in the community how they talk about a game before, let's say, buying it, if that's applicable.
Hmm. Yeah. So like, is that something you've seen in other forums? Like, um, are there forums for particular video games that people who don't have access to the game can read? Do you know
Oh,
of any?
sure. There must be. I'm just
Surely,
not. I'm blanking on that. Yeah, I don't know.
because I can't think of any
Can't
examples off the
believe
top of
that
my head.
there's. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I guess right now the kind of early access thing is really exploding. Everybody's releasing games before they're done. Uh, it must be happening somewhere, and I guess that would be a case to be looking at to see does it work? Does it increase sales or not? I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay. I can't think of anything else to bring up on the topic. Was there anything you wanted to go into about this idea of how we talk to people inside and outside of different groups?
Um, well, I have a personal, I guess, example of kind of a situation that happened in another game that I can talk about and
Great.
relate that, I guess, back to social psychology, the contact hypothesis, and all that. So maybe I could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So essentially, I guess this was a long time ago. I guess not really that long, back in high school, but I was playing version of Call of Duty. I'm not really sure which one now, but it must have been, one of the ones around 4 or 5, but it wasn't called 5. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Essentially, so I guess you already said this, but I live in Quebec, Canada, and here we talk French and English, and that makes it such that most of my friends speak French. And I was playing the game. We were playing, we were playing this game mode that essentially forced us to play the game to talk to each other in public voice chat. So the other people on our team were hearing us when we were talking. So that was
Ah,
kind of this situation that the game put us in. And at some point, I guess this was frustrating to other players, which is obvious. I mean, they don't want to hear people speaking a language that they don't understand necessarily when they're playing a game. And
OP.
so, and another player on my team, he told me, he said, speak American, and then he added an expletive. I'm not sure if that expletive is really relevant right now, but he said speak American. And I mean, I felt a bit like attacked, getting personally attacked by somebody online. I didn't, and it really is, it's not really a person. It's just this voice coming out of nowhere telling me to speak American.
Hmm.
My good reaction was basically to respond to him. At the time I was, I guess, 13 or something, so that's relatively young. And I responded to him. I insulted him a little bit because American isn't the language; it's called English.
Hmm.
And the guy started like not crying, but he started like cracking up, like not cracking up. I'm not sure how you would say that. He was on the verge of crying, let's say. And kind of this situation where the game context brought on this behavior from me, which kind of brought on conflict with another player because the other player didn't like what we were doing, and then it kind of escalated, right?
Hmm.
And I guess this is just a simple example of a specific example of how the context of a game or the context of the environment can have an effect on your behavior and contribute to actually affecting how people interact with each other. And that's why I think this kind of thing is important. This the social context and the social psychology and how we kind of build the game, because it has effect on how the people play it and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good example. What it sort of feels like to me is it's being considerate of how you react to a different group when they're behaving in a way that you maybe don't like. So
Mm.
this person thought, oh, these people speaking in a different language is inappropriate for whatever reason. I guess
Mm-hmm.
maybe he just thought it was a strategic disadvantage or was racist or some combination
Mm-hmm.
thereof. Um, and so he allowed himself to become emotionally overwhelmed by that, and then that then triggered um, uh, negative behavior in in both you and your friends. So yeah, it definitely sounds like an important thing to be considerate of is like how do we respond as one group to behavior of another group when we think they're behaving inappropriately or just in a way that we don't like.
Mm-hmm. And I think even this even extends kind of further, especially online, where people aren't really people. I mean, they're just usernames, right? If you think about it, that's how they're represented, and sometimes we make the mistake of thinking of these entities as just being usernames, not really people.
Right, they're
And
distanced from us.
and I think it makes it easier to kind of think of them as being others. We think of ourselves as being ourselves, but we often, let's say, the less we think of something else as being human, the less we think of it as being related to ourselves, and the less we treat it less as, we perhaps treat them less well if we think that they're
People.
less close to us, less related to us, let's say,
Yeah.
or people in general. Yeah.
Well, I mean that definitely sounds relevant to uh, the context you were speaking about of the contact hypothesis, since you said it was uh, conceived in the context of racial discrimination in the
Yeah.
US, because that is precisely what that issue is about, and even to this day, but in like more subtle degrees,
Subtle ways.
is
Yeah.
yeah is the racism and sexism are about the othering of others of uh, us perceiving people different from us uh, as
More differently than they actually are,
well, I'm like
perhaps.
I know that like I don't actually have the like proper description of this, and so I'm
Mhm.
quite fumbling with it. But and actually even that isn't true because really that's just discrimination, and that's bad enough. Whereas racism and sexism are actually like institutional inequality, where a particular group is reinforcing that inequality through discrimination. So, like,
Mm.
um, a, a black person insulting me, like, Caucasian middle class person, isn't racism in the same way because there isn't the institution of inequality and discrimination against
Mhm.
middle class white people.
Mhm.
Um,
I guess it also depends on kind of what definition you have of all these terms, which
yeah,
kind of
of
difficult once again
discrimination
in the
and
spoken
equality. Yeah.
form, and yeah, so that's kind of a problem you run into.
But that is perhaps something interesting to consider is that, okay, so in that sense, there are things in like Spy Party and other competitive games where there are hard rules you can have for what is equal status. So
Mhm.
nobody has like particular equipment in Spy Party that makes them superior to other players.
Mhm.
There are no ranking systems outside of um, uh, numbers of game played, and
Mhm.
and that's perhaps something interesting for us to think about is like, do we want like ranking systems in the game, or like how do we want to display that information about where people are scaled up against each other in leaderboards and whatnot? So that's certainly something that hopefully we can talk more about in the contact hypothesis thread. Is how do we want this information displayed about players?
Because now, at least now, if you take if you believe that the contact hypothesis applies to Spy Party, then we can make a kind of a better judgment on kind of these issues. Let's say about ranks and different abilities of different players, and I think it's just a way of keeping more informed, of leading, I guess, Spy Party into a better future. Let's say.
Yeah, and insulating against the threat of Steam.
Yeah, because the impetus for me posting that was just everybody seemed so scared, and I thought maybe I could do a little bit to kind of help ease the pain of here's this little tool you may be able to use to help this out.
Yeah, cool. So I know I feel like we've sort of said it as much as we can about the issue, and now it's like up to the rest of you to like um uh perhaps feed the conversation and say like what do we want to have as information in the game, and like why we want it structured a particular way. So hopefully this will drive more of a discussion in that forum thread.
Hopefully.
Cool. All right. Well, with any closing remarks or things you wanted to go over before we finish it up?
I think I said all I had to say. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Bill to Win, very much for coming on and talking to us about this important issue for the future of Spy Party.
Cool. Thank you for having me.